Have you noticed how dark it's getting? I mean, this was almost a sunrise service today. The night is getting so long. And some of you might be aware that this Friday at 5:53 p.m. is the winter solstice, meaning it's the longest night of the year for those of us who live north of the equator. Now, that may not be a really big deal here in Bonita Springs because the longest night of the year on Friday will only be about 3 hours and 17 minutes longer night than in the summer. So our night doesn't get a lot longer. Our Canadian friends will tell you their longest night is 7 hours longer of darkness on the winter solstice. Our friends from Alaska will tell you theirs is 17 hours longer. And at the North Pole, on December 21st, the sun doesn't even come up. So anybody living at the North Pole, that's a good time of year to kind of sled south, you know. So it's the dark time. You know, before people had watches and smartphones and all those other ways that we tell time, they used the heavens to figure it out. So the sun would tell them if it was morning or evening, and a sundial could give you some sense within the day. The moon gave them kind of where they were within the month, but the solstice is how they kept up with what was happening by the year. And so the winter solstice was, they were very much aware of how the sun was tracking around. Now, the most common, the most famous, I suppose, of the structures in ancient times that was built really around the winter solstice is Stonehenge. Some of you been to Stonehenge in Great Britain? These incredible monoliths, tons in weight. Don't know how they put them all together, but they're completely arranged in just perfect order so that on the winter solstice, this Friday, the sun comes up right in between the most huge of those pillars and just splits them right down the middle like a 60-yard field goal. And it's that day that the entire thing was put together for, because they would gather these ancients in that circle, and perhaps they were celebrating that from now on the days will get a little longer. Maybe the winter's going to finally break loose a little bit, but they were celebrating it when winter was at its worst. The truth is, winter begins at the winter solstice. So get ready, because temperatures are going to start plummeting into the low 50s even around here. Cover up your plants. Complain to your northern neighbors. The beginning of the winter, the darkest, longest night of the year. And for a lot of people, that brings out a lot of real weirdness and nervousness. And there's some people who left Seattle because it only is sunny there like one weekend in October. And they got away from there because they just wanted to be in some sunshine. How many of you came to the Sunshine State, Florida, because you just wanted to be somewhere where it was a little warmer and you could, I'm one of those that I get lifted by the sunshine, right? And the darkness, just the opposite, feels like it just, So this longest night. Now, in our culture, in our mythology, in our movies, in our books, we really play off of this light and dark imagery a lot. And the dark always represents, or almost always represents, bad. And the light almost always represents good. So if you think of the Star Wars movies, for instance, there's Darth Vader, Luke, come over to the dark side of the Force, right? And it's kind of like he's the classic Wild West bad man dressed in black, Or if you're reading Lord of the Rings, there's this evil, dark Lord Sauron, Or if you're reading the Harry Potter movies, there's the dark wizard Lord Voldemort, Or if the pirates have a black flag, and the worst of them was black beard, right? Or if it's the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, she had green skin, but she was dressed in black. And that's not nearly as attractive as Glinda, the White Witch, right? So the black and the dark represents what is because the dark is where witches and vampires and thieves and robbers, it's the darkness. And we want to shy away from that. We're afraid of that. We want to find the pin light that allows us to navigate that, if anything, to shy away from it. So you might approach the winter solstice saying, let's just hunker down and wait till it warms up again. And I would understand that. The truth is, a lot of these images come from the Bible. The Gospel of John that you read just a moment ago probably plays with the images of light and dark more and more deeply than any other book in the entire Bible, where Jesus is the light of the world and the darkness cannot overcome and cannot even understand it, and he pushes the darkness back. It's very clear in that gospel. And so many times that's the way it comes. We use darkness for things more than just in our movies. If someone is harboring sinister revenge thoughts, we say that they're harboring dark thinking. If someone is clueless and ignorant, we say that they are in the dark. Remember when your children were saying that about you? Aren't you glad they don't live with you anymore? If someone is depressed, discouraged, we say, they're going through a dark time. So we use dark, and even when we face death, it's the valley of the shadow. It's the final darkness. And so we tend to shy away from it. Give us light. In fact, when Goethe, the German philosopher, poet, writer, father of the Enlightenment, when he lay dying, it said that as he knew he was dying, he cried out, "Light, light, more light." Because the darkness was caving in. Spanish existentialist philosopher Miguel de Unamuno, commenting on that passage, said, "It's too bad Goethe said light, light, more light. He should have said warmth, warmth, more warmth." Because as every orange grove farmer knows, we do not die of the darkness. We die from the cold. So the dark scares us often. We like to flee from it. We'd rather run to the light where God is. But I'd like to say that I think we overplay this too much. So this morning, I want to turn this on the other way. I'd like to say this morning that the Bible actually has some ambivalence about how it thinks about darkness and light. And despite all that I've just said, the truth is the Bible sometimes flips it around and says, but you know what? There's something to be learned that can only be learned in the darkness too. And here this week, right before Christmas, is a good time to learn it. So our passage, right again from Isaiah, probably no one do we quote more at Christmas time than Isaiah. In Isaiah 60, here's this interesting passage. "Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. A multitude of camels will cover you, young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come. They'll bring gold and frankincense." That sounds like Christmas, doesn't it? "And they'll proclaim the praise of the Lord." But listen to this. "But the sun will no longer be your light by day, nor the brightness of the moon will give you light by night, because the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. So that's the reason your sun will no more go down, and your moon won't withdraw itself, because the Lord is your everlasting light, and your days of mourning shall be ended." In effect, the sun can be a crutch. The truth is, God is also present in the dark. Go back to creation. God comes into creation, there's nothing, a formless void, and there's darkness, and God creates light, right? But did God destroy the darkness when he created light? No, he just separated the darkness from the light. And the darkness he called night, and the light he called day, but night and day became a day. And so there was evening, dark, and morning, light, and it was the first day. And to this day, the Jewish people reckon the day beginning at sundown. So half of the day is actually nighttime. And then you just sort of join it midway through when you wake up. We think the day starts at sunrise. The Bible actually says, no, the nighttime was part of the day God created too. And it's interesting because in the Bible, some of the most important revelatory moments where people meet God and hear from God throughout the entire Scripture happen at night, in the dark. For instance, God taps Abraham, wakes him up in the middle of the night and says, "Abraham, come outside the tent. I want to show you something." So he comes out bleary-eyed, said, "Look up." And he sees all this incredible canopy of stars. And God says to Abraham, Bet you hadn't been seeing those stars, right? No, I didn't see them during the daytime. Well, yeah, right. You can't see them in the daytime. Look at all these stars. Abraham, you're 88 years old. Sarah graduated the same year from high school. You're both old. And I know you've long since stopped praying about that child I promised you, but you think I've forgotten. I hadn't forgotten. And I'm telling you, even though you're going to have trouble filling out the paperwork for Medicare, you're going to have a baby. And you're going to be going to PTA when you're 100, buddy. But you're going to have more descendants than all of these stars you see tonight. And it was awesome, because the only way to take in the beauty and majesty and promise of the stars is to see them at night. They're there in the daytime too, but the light pollution of too much sun wipes them out. There's a gift in the darkness. Abraham's grandson Jacob, running away from his brother where he cheated him again, runs headlong into God, and he's dreaming one night, and in his night sleep, he has this dream of a ladder between heaven and earth and angels going up and down, and God speaks to him and blesses him. And later in his life, he wrestles with God all night long by the river Jabbok. Jacob's son Joseph is a dreamer. In his sleep, God whispers to him again and again and again while they're in Egypt, and by those dreams saves his people into and out of Egypt. Under Moses, the Passover happens at night. The death angel and all of that and the coming out of Egypt, that is all a nighttime miracle. Flip into the New Testament. When does Christmas happen? It's at night. The shepherds are out there, stars of Abraham going on, and suddenly the night, is just shattered with angelic voice, but it's at nighttime when that happens. And how about the Magi? When did they see the star? What time do stars appear? Nighttime. So they're looking up at night, and there's an unusual star, and so they follow the star, but every time the sun comes back out, they have to stop. So they're like third shift workers at the hospital. They have to sleep during the day and work at night. So they got camels on, got flashlights on their camels, and they have to always travel at night following that star that moves, because it's an entire nighttime miracle is Christmas. So it makes perfect sense that Christmas would come when the dark is at its strongest. It's a nighttime miracle. It's a gift in the dark. And by the gift of the Holy Spirit and the power of God, Jesus is conceived in the dark of a womb that's never been used. And he grows to maturity. And at the other end of his life, by a power again of God, he'll be reconceived as he lies in a tomb in the dark that's never been used. And in the dark, he is resurrected. I know at Easter they discovered the empty tomb at sunrise, but he was already gone. He rose in the dark. And even his death on Friday at high noon, what happened? The sun just went out. He died in the dark. So there's a great deal of the Bible that's saying, don't dismiss the dark too quickly. There may be a real gift for you here. And as we saw in some of the passages from our responsive reading earlier, most of the time when God describes God's presence being so real you can feel it, it's not blinding light. It's thick darkness. God wraps himself, shrouds himself in thick clouds of darkness, impenetrable mystery darkness. There's holiness to darkness also. Wow. And when John has the book of Revelation written at the very end, when he pictures a new heaven, how's this all going to end? He says, in the new heaven, there'll be no more ocean and no more sun or moon. Now, I love sunsets over the ocean, don't you? I just love that. I just love it. But if you spent millions of dollars getting a Gulf view to look at the sun going down, enjoy it for now, because that ain't gonna last. That's not good for your property values, I know, but not because it's anything. The point is, it's meant to be just a crutch to get us by. As beautiful as it is, what the gospel, what Isaiah is going to say, and what Revelation is going to say is, as great as the sun is, your real light doesn't come from some orbiting thing. Your real light is God Himself. And that light never goes out. And it doesn't matter what solstice it is. It doesn't matter what the temperature is. It doesn't matter whether the lights are on or not, because He is your light. And that's what I think the gospel is trying to tell us today here in the darkness of Christmas. Because if we could learn to listen to this, we might just discover that we can get used to the dark a little bit more. You know, there are animals that do this. They're just out at night all the time. The owls, you know, or all kind of other animals that are kind of nighttime, nocturnal animals. They just live for the darkness. You know, when you get up at night, in your own, from your bedroom to your refrigerator, until your eyes adjust, it's a minefield, right? But if you just wait just a little bit, you can eventually begin to pick your way through. You can get accustomed to the dark. You can. And there's some gifts to darkness that are just beautiful. For instance, I've heard that dark clothing is slimming. What do you think? Coco Chanel said every woman should have a little black dress, or at least Spanx. And I know some women are saying, who told him about Spanx? That was our secret. Anyway, but the older I get, the more wrinkles and imperfections I develop, the more I think candlelight's romantic. You know, I don't want one of those bright lighted mirrors anywhere near me, right? Toward the end, I'm going to just look better in the darkness, I guess. But the darkness is also where a lot of creativity happens. How many of you have gotten up in the night with a flash of insight, the solving of the riddle or the problem, or a verse of music or something that comes to your head, and you've learned that if you don't write it down, it'll be gone at breakfast, right? The nighttime is, in fact, a time of wonderful, maybe because you're finally relaxing. All those noises are toning down. The light pollution is gone for just a little bit. And there's a wonderful sense of the gift of darkness. Is there somebody here who gets up really, really early, before the sun gets up, before the house gets up, and one of your most sacred, beautiful, and favorite times of the day is in the warm, enveloping darkness? Maybe you're walking your dog or having some quiet time, but you meet God there again and again and again. Is that true for you, some of you? Right? God is present in and especially because there are no other distractions. Or in my case, I stay up later at night after the house has gone to sleep. And in God's humor, one of those early people and late people always marry each other. I don't know why, but for me, it's after everything's gone to sleep. And those are some of the most rich and sacred times for me. And I just sit alone in the dark. I experience God like that. How about you? God is present in the dark. Absolutely present. So you don't have to wait for the summer to get back, or for the sun to rise again, or for things to get better, or the stock market to go back up, or your favorite politician to get elected, or whatever, or your cancer to be removed. You don't have to wait until things look or seem better. God is with you in and especially the dark. And if we could learn, we could eventually wrap ourselves like God does in it until we feel the comfort of it like swaddling clothes. Remember when the Waltons would say goodnight to each other as the house was dark? Good night, John Boy. Good night, Granddaddy, you know. And they'd all call each other by name in the darkness. And John Boy says, as he narrates it, I never felt more at home or more safe as in that darkness I heard us each calling by name. And that's better than a nightlight any day, right? Well, this creative gift, if we would take it, of the darkness, people have experienced this. There was two teenagers, for instance. One was named Paul, the other was name was Arthur. And they had a little band, like teenagers sometimes do. And they would try to write some music, and they weren't very successful. But Paul would write music in his bathroom at night and close the door because it was the darkest room in the house, and it kind of echoed from the tile, I guess. But what he liked about it is in the dark, he wouldn't be looking at the strings on his guitar. He wouldn't be thinking about the notes. It would just begin to flow. And he did more of his songwriting and more of his creativity in the darkness than any other time. And so he wrote a song one time, and it started out, "Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to speak with you again." And so you know his name was Paul Simon. He and Art Garfunkel had broken up their band, but that song ended up being a #1 hit, so they decided to get back together. And then Bridge Over Troubled Water and all the rest of it came after that. But it was created out of the darkness. Pay attention. That's when your dreams come. That's when God can whisper to you because all the other noise is off. I heard a stat this week that we look at these things about 2,000 times a day. So some of you are getting really fidgety, like a smoker needing a spoke because you've gone for an hour without it, I realize. We would do well to receive God's gift and turn off the lights a little bit, turn down the noise and the music, and learn again to be able to say, "Hello, darkness." And my friend, actually, in that, the God who knows my name. And I'm speaking to someone this morning who's going through a particularly dark time. You're experiencing grief at Christmas when it just doesn't seem natural. You've been betrayed at a time when we should all be about peace and people of goodwill. You are ill and your body's letting you down, and you're both mad and sad about it. You have relationships that have fractured and you don't know how to go on, how to fix it, or how to live in a world that broken. You know who you are. Friend, in that darkness, not after it, in that darkness, God has a gift for you. And the gift is Himself. Listen to this incredible passage again from Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 3. Because God has a Christmas gift for each of us. It's being given to you, asking us to unwrap it here in the darkest time of the year. Listen and receive this gift from God. God says, I will give you the treasures of darkness, the treasures, and riches hidden in secret places, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. And that's the reason, John Boy, or whatever your name is, if you hear God whispering your name in the dark, it's the reason you don't have to be afraid. I have a pastor friend in Michigan who told the story about having a man who died way too soon. He was my age, and that's equivalent to too soon. That goes up 1 year each year, but anyway, he's early 60s, and he passes away at Christmas time. The family's gathering at the funeral home, viewing of the body. The pastor goes, and he's greeted by the granddaughter, a 4-year-old, who comes up, recognizes her pastor, and takes him by the hand and says, "Come, let me show you Granddaddy." So he goes, and she takes him over to the box, and they look, and she says, "This is sad, isn't it?" And the pastor says, "Yes, it is." And then her mother comes over, and she reaches her mother's hand, and she's holding the pastor's hand and her mother's hand, and they're just kind of standing there looking at the box, and then the daughter kind of lifts her feet, and she starts swinging between the two, just so full of life still. Despite all of this darkness and all of this unquestionable mystery, she's still alive. They have lost much, but they hadn't lost everything. She's still there, And then she does something that she started singing a song she just learned in church that year. she started singing Away in the Manger. No crib for his bed, the little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. And everybody was just hushed, as if in the presence of angels. And the adults began to put associations together that 4-year-old could not have imagined. As a beloved one was lying in a box, no crying he made. And it reminded her and them of Jesus being laid in just such a box. But because he came in the darkest of those times, they could face theirs too, without having to be afraid. This is the gift God's trying to give us. And it's why Emmanuel, I am with you, especially in the dark, is such a gift. Perhaps you have a gift to give back. Gold, frankincense, myrrh, something. Because that's what we do when you're overwhelmed by that. I'm going to ask Michelle to come and stand at the box and echo that little girl's song. And as she does, we'll invite you to open up your treasures, if you've learned anything in the dark, and give it back to the one who's with you in and especially now.
Till morning is nigh.